Hello and welcome back to the Little Craft House. So the other day I was lucky enough to be in the right spot at the right time in the op shop when they put out some rubber stamps. So I was able to grab a whole bunch of different rubber stamps. They were pretty cheap, and although I don't do paper craft to use the rubber stamps, I thought why not use them on some polymer clay. So I thought we could play around with these today together to work out what fun patterns, textures and effects we could create to use when we're doing polymer clay projects. Okay, so I thought I'd start with a quick little haul to show you some of these cute little designs that are in here. There's lots of plants and insects and birds and things which are totally my thing, really loving them. And it's really good, they all look quite new as well, like they've not had an awful lot of use, which is a really good thing. I don't have to clean them up too much, and we can pretty much just get straight into using some of these. So one of the things in the past that has kind of not stopped me from using rubber stamps on the polymer clay, but something that I kind of I've never had, is many ink pads. So I do have one ink pad. It's a golden black color, so it's not even like solid black. So that's one of the reasons that I think I've had a couple of stamps before, but nothing much, and because I don't have the ink pads, I've just never really considered it a way to use it. But today we are going to explore some different ways that we can use the stamps on the clay. So if you don't have ink pads, then I'm going to show you some different ways that you can use them. Now, because today we're just going to be playing around with the stamps, I'm not going to create actual projects. We're just going to do some little prototypes and just see what ways work best for using the stamps, and what's going to be most effective, so that we can then replicate it later when we're doing actual projects. Okay, so first up, this technique I've done multiple times before, but I've usually used my embossing cutters, so the cutters that have like an embossed effect to them. So yeah, I haven't done it with the rubber stamp before, but I'm assuming it's going to be pretty much the same. So what I've got here is some foil. So it's similar to like a gold leaf foil, but this one is red in colour, and I'm just going to cut it down to being the size of the piece of clay that I'm going to use, because I want to waste the least amount as possible. Look at that shine, isn't it beautiful? Right, so we're going to pop our foil onto the clay. Now, this one is not behaving, and it could have just gone on nice and smoothly and been all aesthetically pleasing, but no, instead it's decided to tear multiple times, which doesn't actually affect the end result. It just doesn't look as nice as I'm applying it. It looks like I'm being really messy, and it's just being difficult and sticking to my fingers. But what I'm going to do is push it down onto the polymer clay. Right, getting there. I'm just going to smooth it on so that it sticks. I don't need any adhesive or anything, it just sticks on nicely because the clay is sticky enough that it'll hold on. But I'm just going to give it a nice little smooth on, rub it with my finger, and we just want to make sure that there's no air gaps underneath or anything. And when doing this, also make sure that your hands aren't wet, because if you've been cleaning up and you've touched a damp cloth or a baby wipe, you'll notice that it will then stick to your fingers. And then getting the stamper, I'm just going to place it on. I'm going to try and do two. I think I can get two side by side. Place it on and push down the stamp, making that nice stamp indent. It's always a trick to making sure you put the same amount of pressure on for both sides. That's something definitely got to get used to. Right, now the reflection of my camera is showing a little bit on that, so it's a bit hard to see. Right, there we go. So you can see there, the nice little lady beetles are indented into the clay with that foil. Now, here's the tricky part, is getting some sticky tape. So the foil's not going to come off by itself because it's now stuck onto the clay, but by using sticky tape, we're just going to apply that on the top and peel it off, and it is going to peel off all the excess foil that's not been pushed down into that design. So just going to put it on and pull it off. Might need to do it a couple of times in some spots if it doesn't grab it properly. and just don't press too hard over the top of the design because we don't want to grab anything that's been pushed down. Now this technique's really good for using if you've got smaller, scrappier bits left over so that you don't have to waste quite as much. Just going around the edges, neatening it up here a little bit. But this technique looks really good. I have done, yeah, very similar before with an embossing stamper, and it was with a leaf, and it was a gold leaf, and I had some more neutral colours behind, and that actually looked really, really good. So yeah, I thought I would do it with this red and black. So this looks pretty cool. I do like this effect. I would probably just seal this with either a coat of resin over the top or maybe just a varnish. But yeah, they're looking pretty cute. And I know I said I was just going to do these as prototypes, but I will cut them out into a couple of little shapes here because I might make these into some earrings for me because they're very cute. Okay, next up we're going to use some alcohol ink. So I've just got some polymer clay there that I have conditioned and rolled out. This is the stamper I'm going to use, a flower, which has a little bit of detail in those petals. So I'm not sure how that's going to turn out, but we'll give it a go. I've got a paint palette here, which I'm just going to give a little wipe out because it's quite dirty. Probably shouldn't be doing it over the top of my polymer clay. But yeah, here's the alcohol ink. So it's a Panada one that I'm going to use. Panada is quite strong in colour, and this magenta colour is absolutely beautiful. So I'm just going to pop a couple of little squirts into the palette there. And I don't have a brush handy, so I'm going to use a little sponge instead. And I'm just going to sponge the ink onto the stamper there. Just going to make sure that I get really good coverage, and also just making sure that I work quite quickly with the alcohol because it does tend to dry out quite quickly, so I don't want to take my time too much. And again, just putting down an even amount of pressure, and that colour looks absolutely amazing on there. So I am going to cut a circle out around this one. That looks really nice. It's got the little bits of detail in the center of the circle as well. The little lines doesn't look like it's turned out quite as much detail, but it still looks really good. Okay, next up we're going to use this cute little heart, and because the shape is quite small, I thought we'd give a go using a Posca paint marker. So you guys know how much I love my Poscas. I use them all the time for lots of things. So I wondered if we're going to be able to colour it in and transfer it. And because it's a small shape, I thought that that's probably going to be our best chance of it actually working. So I'm just going to outline the shape, make sure that it's nice and wet on there. Again, going to have to work kind of quick so that the ink doesn't dry, or the paint doesn't dry rather. Yay, that worked quite well. And that's kind of exciting because it means that it can open up a lot of possibilities for doing things with multicolour. Oh, I'll have to investigate that a bit more. Okay, next up is something that's actually really obvious, and I probably should have done it as the first idea because it doesn't take any paint or ink or anything. It's just using the stamper to add some texture to a plain piece of polymer clay. So this is something that I do quite often, using different objects just to add a bit of interest to plain clay. Occasionally I have some clay that's just a really beautiful colour and it doesn't need too much going on, so I'll just add a bit of texture and then cut out my pieces. So this little flower here, it actually works really well, and I think that looks really nice for adding just a little bit of texture. Okay, so the next couple of ideas that we're going to play around with are going to involve doing the stamp first before putting in the oven to bake. And we're going to add the colour and details after they're baked. So I'm just starting here with some plain clay. Plain's going to be best because it's going to show our colours the most. So using this cute little bluebird, is it a bluebird? A blue wren? Could even be a little willy wagtail actually. But yeah, so we're going to use this one to start with. And I'm also going to use some ivory clay here. Smooth that one out. And I'm going to use a couple of, I'm going to use this the poppy flower, but I'm going to do 2 of them. So the first one I'm just doing the imprint as is. And I'm also going to grab my little ink pad. Where's it gone? Here we go. So yeah, it is a golden black colour, so it's not black. I wish it was a black, like a nice dark one. It's a bit more grey, I suppose, because it's got that, oh yeah, it says golden, but I don't know, it's a bit more, I suppose, charcoal, if anything. All right, so we're just going to stamp that one on as well, which looks pretty good. And then I've just cut out around the edges here, just making them 2 little pieces. And then, yeah, I'm going to pop all 3 of those into the oven to bake. And once again, I have raided my posca stash. I've decided that he's going to be a blue wren because that way I get to use some colour on him. So I've chosen the poscas that have the finest tips. So the PC1MR is obviously best for this. I think I had to pull out a PC3M as well just because I didn't have that light blue in the thinner tip. But yeah, so I'm just going to colour in the elements that I want with colour, and then afterwards I will pop these back into the oven for 15 minutes to bake and cure the posca pens. That will help to set the paint. I will probably add a sealant to these as well, which will probably just be a Sculpey gloss. Obviously, I had to speed this up. It took me quite a little while to get the details, get all the details done. So yeah, I've just sped it up so you can still sort of see me working. And again, I'm not the best artist, so this is a little bit rough, but it's the idea that counts. That cream colour didn't work well, so I switched it out for an orange instead, and I think I used the black then for the legs as well. Yes, I did, because yeah, the cream didn't work. All right, and this is the one that I used the ink for. So I obviously stamped the ink on it, and I'm going to use the Posca pens now to once again colour in, but because the ink is there, it already has that outlined border. I actually think I like this better, having the outlined border, and I think that that bird probably would have looked good as well with having a border, because the legs and some of that small detail would have, like on the wings and things, it would have stood out a little bit more so than with just the Posca. And once again, I've just chosen the finest tip pens to colour this in, and I'm just being really careful to colour in the lines. Right, so with the other poppy that I stamped, I'm going to try and do a bit of a paint fill with it. So I've done paint fills before with acrylics, and I have done it with polymer clay too, I think, actually. I've decided that I'm going to use this little ball tip rather than a paintbrush. I'm just going to try and fill the paint into each of those lines, the indents from the stamper, and I want to try and get it as precise as possible without too much paint on the outside. When I've done it previously, if you get too much paint on the outside of the clay, it can sometimes be unable to be removed, especially because this is a metallic paint that I'm using. So when I've done this before, it's left a shimmer of the metallic paint on my clay, which didn't look bad, but it wasn't the look I was going for. So I'm going to use this ball tip tool here, which I would usually use for either making holes in my clay or for doing little texture. And I'm just going to fill each of these lines with the paint using that tip. When I use paint on my clay, whether it be for silk screening or just generalized painting on the polymer, I just use normal acrylic paint. So this one's the Polymer brand, and as I mentioned before, it is a metallic one. But yeah, just any normal acrylic paints I've found work well. This pink paint is also from the Polymer brand. It's a fluoro pink, so it's nice and bright, and yeah, I really like this colour. I'm not sure how this paint fill is going to go here. Some of these lines on the top of the flower don't seem deep enough, so I'm just going to try my hardest. I might need to do a couple of coats, try this a couple of times to get it filled in nicely, or I might need to touch it up a little bit with a paint pen or something afterwards. I probably should have pressed it in just a little bit harder to make those lines a little bit more defined. But I guess we'll see once it's finished. So once I have finished filling in all of these lines, I'm going to leave the paint to dry. So I'm probably going to leave it for an hour or so to make sure that it's nicely dry. Okay, so time got away from me. It is now the next day. This has had overnight to dry, so the paint is well and truly dry. Now, as you can see, the lines aren't quite as defined as what we would like them. So I'm going to grab an alcohol wipe and we're going to clean up around the edges. So I like alcohol wipes. You could possibly use a baby wipe too. And I'm just going to be kind of gentle in a rubbing motion. I'm going to go around the edges and I'm just going to try and remove off any of the paint that is on the clay and not in those grooves. Now you'll see what I mean about the smudging of colour here with the pink that I was talking about earlier. You can see how it's going onto the clay. Well, I'm just going to keep wiping off that extra until it cleans the clay. And as predicted, my lines weren't quite deep enough, so some of that extra paint has come out. I might do a second coat to fix it up, just so that it's a little bit more defined, but I also am going to use my black paint pen just to do the centre of the flower as well. That's not really pressed down deep either, so I don't think the paint fill will work for that. But paint fill works really well if you can get a nice deep amount of pressure on your stamper. Okay, so I have a little confession to make. When I baked up these components, I had my oven set too high. The temperature was too high, so it's discoloured the tops a little bit. But lucky for me, these are just prototypes, so it's not going to really matter. I've already pre-adjusted the oven for next time so that it's not going to burn again. What I'm going to do later on is just write on the backs of these pieces what I used to give me these effects. So this one was the alcohol ink, and it actually kind of ended up being a little bit splotchy. I must have put too much on in some of those parts. But yeah, I'm going to write it on the back. So that was the alcohol ink, and that one was the Posca pen. I've got my foil ones here that we created, the little ladybugs. And when I was doing those, I mentioned about the gold leaf that I had done a different time, which was this one here. So it has the gold leaf stamper with the gold foil underneath. So that one worked really well as well. And then I've got my ones with the Posca colouring in and with the ink. This one here was one that just has the, I've just used the ink stamper. I didn't colour this one in or anything, just purely using the stamp pad for that one. And then we also have our paint fill as well. So they were all the different ways that we were able to use our rubber stamps on our polymer clay. So I just want to thank you guys for joining me today. Hopefully it has got you inspired and thinking about some ways that you can use, maybe you've already got some stampers, so ways you can use things that you already have on your polymer clay. If not, keep an eye out at those op shops because yeah, I got a really good bargain with these ones. Thank you guys for joining me today. I hope you've enjoyed it and I'll see you again next week. Bye.